If you're a Canadian who's chosen not to go to the US, well, they have the old Cheeto fascist in charge down there, give yourselves a pat on the back. We cost that administration $3 billion in tourism funds. I feel pretty good about that.
Many people in the MAGA movement believe that if they apply enough pressure, Canada will eventually be forced to give in to the United States. But everything is unfolding in the exact opposite direction. Instead of Canada being the first to bear the consequences, there are growing signs that Americans themselves are the ones beginning to pay the price. Prices could rise, businesses are facing higher costs, and industries that depend on trade with Canada are coming under increasingly visible pressure. Now, many voices within the MAGA camp are expressing outrage. They argue that Canada is challenging the United States and needs to face a stronger response. But will that approach really force Canada to back down, or is it causing the American people themselves to bear consequences they never expected? Today, let's examine why Canada still refuses to yield to pressure from the United States, what is fueling the anger within the MAGA camp, and whether this confrontation is turning into a gamble in which the country paying the highest price may ultimately be the United States itself. What do we have this week?
The air quality index in Metro Detroit right now is over 150, and it literally looks like somebody has hotboxed my state, guys. Real talk though, this is really scary. I know we're not going to address climate change right now, but hopefully soon. Stay safe, guys.
I'm 31 weeks pregnant. I'm actually closer to 32. This summer has been like the hottest summer that we've had in a long time, and it's been like 100 degrees. I can't go outside right now because we have all of the smoke from the wildfires that were coming from Canada. I can't breathe. I'm nauseous. I'm already nauseous because of the heat and being in my third trimester, and now you want to add smoke. It's like smoking like a pack of cigarettes. I should not be outside right now.
Okay, it looks like the weather in the United States has not been all that great lately. And as you just saw, Canada is heading into another severe wildfire season. That is not exactly surprising. If you are an American citizen, I am sure you are already used to this. Canada has an enormous amount of forest, much of it in remote areas that are hard to reach. When the weather gets hotter, the ground and trees get drier, and all it takes is a lightning strike or a small flame to start a fire that is extremely difficult to control. But the problem is the fire may be burning in Canada, but the smoke does not stay on the Canadian side. The wind carries it down into the Midwest and the Great Lakes region, and then it spreads across several states in the Northeast. American families are the ones who have to close their windows. American children are the ones who have to cancel outdoor activities. And American workers are the ones who still have to stand outside and work in that thick, hazy air. And do you know what the most frustrating part is? You can live hundreds or even thousands of kilometers away from the fire and still pay the price through your health, your work schedule, and an entire summer being turned upside down. For pregnant women, young children, older people, or anyone with heart or lung problems, this is no longer just about the sky looking a little bad. It becomes a question of whether they should even step outside today. So I understand why Americans want the government to speak up and deal with this. When smoke from another country is directly affecting your own people, the President of the United States clearly cannot just sit around and wait for the wind to change direction. But the question is, how is he going to deal with it? Will Washington coordinate firefighting efforts, provide more aircraft share data, and protect public health? Let us hear the answer from the President of the United States.
I think what we're going to do is we're going to put a major tariff on Mexico because of the lettuce, and we're going to put a big tariff on Canada because of the smoke. All right? We'll get a combo. Which would you have, the lettuce or the smoke? I think I'll take the smoke.
Yeah, the smoke wrecked my daughter's swim meet.
Well, it's closed up a lot of countries. I've told Canada they have to do something about it. You know, we've never had this problem. All of a sudden we have this problem with Canada.
Once again, the answer is tariffs. And honestly, I am not all that surprised. We have become very familiar with his style. Tariffs seem to be turning into the key he tries in just about every lock. Protect factories, tariffs. Pressure partners into making concessions, tariffs. Control imports, tariffs. And now it looks like even smoke crossing the border is being thrown into the same formula. I am not saying the concerns of Americans are unreasonable. The smoke is real, the health effects are real, and Canada clearly still has questions to answer about forest management and its ability to respond. But think about it, how many wildfires will tariffs on Canadian goods actually put out? Will that money go toward firefighting aircraft hospitals or air quality warning systems? Or are we taking an extremely complicated environmental problem and dropping it into a trade dispute that is already tense enough? Leave your thoughts about this in the comments. After that statement, many Canadians online reacted very strongly. They brought up stories about Canadians who had helped fight wildfires in the United States. On July 12, 2026, Nicholas Dale, a 56-year-old pilot from British Columbia, was killed when his helicopter crashed while he was helping fight a wildfire in Colorado. He was a contract pilot and was not part of an official Canadian government mission, but when the accident happened, he was making water drops to protect American communities. A Canadian lost his life while helping America fight a wildfire. A few days later, Canadians were hearing that they might face even more tariffs because of the smoke. But I think all of this was still only the last straw. Before the smoke ever showed up, the glass had already been filled with tariffs, trade pressure, and comments about Canada becoming the 51st state.
If you want Canada to become the 51st state, then you are a traitor and the worst Canadian out there. You want to become an American so bad? Move down there. We don't need you up here, you.
Canada is going to become the 51st state.
It will never become the 51st state, and guess what? I will bear arms.
Canada does not want to be a part of the United States.
Not one bit.
I don't think the U.S. knows what they're taking on because they're seeing, sure, a lot of fresh water, a lot of land out there. But I urge any American, have you ever been to Duluth, Minnesota? Do you really want 38 million more people from Duluth?
America tried doing this shit in the 1800s, and we were like,
It ain't gonna happen. There's just too many fundamental differences between Canada and the U.S. If you go to high school in Canada, the term dodging a bullet just means she ain't pregnant.
or you just barely passed.
Dodging a bullet in the U.S. high school system means that probably the guy standing behind you is dead.
And now that frustration is no longer staying inside videos and comment sections, Canadians are turning it into action, and America is starting to get the bill.
So Canadians have been boycotting the United States and not traveling here because of Donald Trump. And it really worked. Canadians made 29.1 million trips to the United States in 2025, which is down from 39 million in 2024. The drop was the sharpest in more than 50 years of record keeping. And it's not like Canadians just stopped traveling altogether. They just started going other places. So for example, trips to Asia from Canada jumped 16.7% year over year. Trips to Europe also rose 13.6% year over year.
And the first bill does not land in Washington, it lands in Maine. Picture a family from Quebec that used to drive down to Old Orchard Beach every summer. They would book a room for a few nights, eat seafood, buy gas, do some shopping, and then head back to Canada. Nothing major, just a short vacation for an ordinary family. But this year, they are not coming. There is no television alert announcing a canceled reservation. There is no protest in the street. The car simply does not show up at the border, and along with it, the money for the room gas, food, and tips all disappears. That is what I find most important about this story. Canadians do not need to create a big scene to make America feel the consequences. They just need to stay home or drive in another direction. Maine is especially vulnerable because it sits right next to Quebec and New Brunswick. Many coastal towns have grown used to treating Canadian visitors as an almost guaranteed part of the summer season. But reports from early 2026 showed that the share of Canadian visitors during the previous tourist season had fallen from about 7% to 4%, while direct tourism spending in the state had also declined. Maine has not turned into a ghost town, but do you know what is more worrying than a sudden collapse? It is when a source of income that people once took for granted starts disappearing little by little. The owners of inns in Maine did not impose tariffs on Canada. Servers in Old Orchard Beach did not ask for Canada to become the 51st state either. But they are the first people to see empty tables, empty rooms, and fewer tips. And now that we are in 2026, Canadians still have not returned like they used to. In January, the number of trips from Canada to the United States fell about 22% compared with the same period a year earlier. February was down 12.5%, March fell another 6.4%, marking the 15th straight month of decline. By the middle of the year, the numbers started inching up from the very low levels of 2025. Hearing that, you might think everything is fine again. But hold on, in June 2026, the number of trips rose 3.2% from the year before, but it was still nearly 29% lower than in June 2024. Travel by car was down nearly 30%, travel by air was down about 25%, and Canadians have not stopped traveling. They are still packing their bags, still booking hotels, and still spending money. It is just that many of them are choosing Europe, Latin America, or Asia instead of the United States. The money did not disappear, it just changed addresses. One Canadian family changing its vacation destination may sound small, but when millions of small decisions all move in the same direction, American restaurants lose customers, Hotels lose bookings, airlines cut seats, and workers lose income. And this is only the passport part of the story. After they stopped bringing their money to America, many Canadians also started taking another look at every American product sitting in their shopping carts. If you ask many Canadians what they have been avoiding lately, the answer may not be a specific brand. It could be any product that makes them feel like their money is going right back to the United States. And the most visible thing right now is alcohol. Some provinces have pulled American alcohol from their locally controlled distribution systems or stopped importing it. Bottles of bourbon whiskey and wine that once had a familiar place on store shelves suddenly became part of a trade dispute. But the more important part is not the decision made by provincial governments. It is how consumers responded afterward. A government can take a bottle off the shelf. It can also put that bottle back after a new agreement, but nobody can force a customer to put that bottle in their cart. Some Canadians are deliberately reading labels, checking where products were made, and choosing domestic products or goods from other countries. Wine from Canada, Chile, or Argentina does not need to win a political argument. It just needs to taste good enough, be affordable enough, and be available when customers feel like trying something new. At first, this may only be a reaction driven by anger, but after a few months, a reaction can easily become a habit. And that is the part American businesses should be worried about. One bottle of bourbon not being sold in Ontario may sound small, but behind that bottle is a grain farm, a bottling plant, a warehouse, a delivery driver, and American workers waiting for the next order. So I keep coming back to the same question: if tariffs are supposed to protect American workers, what happens when Canada responds by taking customers away from American goods? And this is not the first time an American brand has discovered that Canadian affection is not a blank check. Just look at Target. Target moved into Canada very quickly, opened 133 stores, and then shut down the entire operation after only about 2 years. The important thing is that Canadians were already very familiar with the brand. Before that, many of them had driven to the United States just to shop at Target. So when the chain opened in Canada, expectations were extremely high. But the actual experience was nothing like what they remembered. Many stores had problems keeping products in stock. Prices were higher than expected, selection was limited. Many customers walked into a familiar brand but felt like they were getting a version that was more expensive, emptier, and less appealing. Target executives later admitted that the company expanded too quickly, had inventory problems, and could not reverse the negative impression that had already formed among customers. I do not think Canadians rejected Target simply because it was an American company. In fact, they had been looking forward to it. The name got Target across the border, but the actual experience was not good enough to keep customers coming back. Of course, the two stories do not have the same cause. Target failed because of operational mistakes, prices, and expectations. The current move away from American goods comes from trade tensions and a desire to keep money in Canada. And Canada's power does not only come from the things it stops buying, it also comes from the things America still has to buy from Canada. After looking at what Canadians are no longer buying, I think we need to turn the question around a little. What is America still buying from Canada? If you only look at the size of the economies, the answer seems way too easy. The United States is much larger than Canada, so sooner or later, Canada will have to give in. I understand why so many people think that way. But trade is not as simple as the bigger country always winning. Sometimes the advantage comes down to something very small. You have exactly what the other person needs at a time when they cannot find another supplier. I'm also not saying Canada can turn its back on the United States without facing any consequences. That is not true. The Canadian economy depends heavily on customers' factories and markets south of the border. If trade between the two countries breaks down, Canadian workers and businesses will suffer too. But being dependent does not mean having no leverage. Let us start with electricity. Some northern states in the United States have been buying electricity from Canada for years. When summer temperatures rise and air conditioners are running at full power, electricity from the north helps take pressure off the power grid in New York and the Northeast. A few percentage points may not sound like much, but try taking that amount of electricity out of the system on the hottest day of the year. The shortage still has to be replaced by something else, and that replacement is usually not cheap. I'm not saying Canada can just turn off the lights in New York whenever it wants. The power system does not work like a light switch in your living room. There are contracts, regulations, and backup supplies. But if imported electricity becomes more expensive or less reliable, where will those costs go? They could show up in electric bills, business operating costs, and the prices Americans pay for everyday products. The same goes for oil. The United States produces a lot of oil on its own. But many American refineries were built specifically to process the heavy oil that comes from Canada. So finding oil somewhere else does not mean you can simply pour it into the system and keep going like nothing happened. You need the right kind of oil, the right pipelines, and the right refineries. Natural gas follows a similar logic. America has enormous gas supplies, but that gas does not magically appear in every state at the same price. Pipelines were built along specific routes many years ago, and some northern areas still depend heavily on Canadian gas. Then there is something people talk about less often: potash. Potash is an important ingredient in fertilizer production. If Canadian potash becomes more expensive, American farmers may be the first to feel it. When fertilizer prices go up, the cost of growing corn, wheat, and soybeans goes up too. Then the bill moves on to animal feed, processed food, and finally the checkout counter. Canada also supplies oil, aluminum, uranium, nickel, lumber, and many kinds of minerals that American energy manufacturing and defense industries still need. I do not think the biggest concern is that Canada will cut everything off tomorrow morning. A more realistic scenario is that everything crossing the border gradually becomes more expensive, slower, and less predictable. That alone is enough to make factories recalculate their costs, farmers rethink their budgets, and consumers pay more. Canada needs the American market, but America has also built many of its industries around Canadian energy and raw materials. The two sides are connected too deeply. Pull hard on one side and the other side shakes too. And sometimes in trade, what matters is not how big you are. It is what you have that the other side cannot immediately replace. Do you find this a little strange? Canadians still have not returned to the United States like they used to, but Americans continue heading up to Canada for summer vacations, family visits, and spending money. Almost like everything is normal. It seems like a lot of people south of the border still have not gotten the message that this relationship is having problems. I am not saying that to blame people traveling to Toronto, Montreal, or Vancouver. They may be going on business, watching sports, visiting family, or simply taking a vacation. But the same border is telling two completely different stories. In May 2026, Americans made about 2.2 million trips to Canada, up 13% from the same period a year earlier. Travel by car rose nearly 14%, while air travel increased 6%. Canada is still open, and Americans are still walking through that door. In the other direction, Canadians have also started returning to the United States. If you compare the numbers only with the extremely low point of 2025, but do not let that recovery fool you. In May 2026, travel from Canada to the United States was still nearly 25% lower than in May 2024. By June, the gap was still close to 29%. Put simply, out of every 10 trips that existed before the crisis, nearly 3 still have not come back. And I think this is the real paradox worth noticing. Most Americans are still using their passports for exactly what they are meant for travel. Meanwhile, many Canadians are using their passports like a consumer vote. They do not need to protest in front of the White House. They only need to choose a different beach, a different flight, and a different place to spend their money. But Canada is only where we can see the change most clearly. When goods from Canada, Mexico, China, or any other trading partner become more expensive, American businesses still have to buy metals, parts, and raw materials to keep producing. They may find other suppliers, but those new sources may not be cheaper. Trade rarely disappears. It usually takes a longer route, and longer routes usually come with extra costs. A Federal Reserve study estimated that tariffs imposed in 2025 had raised prices for core goods by about 3.1% as of February 2026. In other words, tariffs do not just stay on customs paperwork. Part of the cost has gone straight into the prices Americans pay for goods. Farmers are not outside this story either. The United States Department of Agriculture projected that net farm income across the industry would fall 2.6% in 2026 after adjusting for inflation, while direct government payments would rise more than 45%. Trade cannot be blamed for all of it, but it is clear that many farms now need a bigger cushion to stay on their feet. I have always believed that America's strength comes from other countries wanting to do business with us. That confidence is like a rubber band. Pull it just enough and it creates force. Keep pulling it for too long and it snaps back. And the first people to feel that snap are usually not in Washington. They are American businesses, farmers, and families standing at the checkout counter. At this point, I do not think the story is only about a few canceled trips, a few bottles of alcohol left on store shelves, or another new tariff. It is starting to touch something harder to see trust. The United States and Canada are like two neighbors who have lived beside each other for a very long time. The two houses share a driveway, connect to the same power lines, and buy and sell from each other every day. When one side faced wildfires, the other sent people and equipment to help. The cooperation happens so regularly that both sides almost assumed the relationship would always be fine. But how long can you stay close to someone if every time you disagree, they remind you that you cannot live without them? Canada definitely needs the United States. The American market is too large, and the supply chains of the two countries are connected too deeply. But what is changing is that Canada no longer seems willing to place all of its stability in a relationship that feels more unpredictable every day. This is not a breakup yet, but one side has clearly started checking its own bank account, looking for more customers, and getting a spare key ready. The wildfire smoke issue is a very clear example. Americans affected by the smoke have every right to be angry. They have every right to demand that Canada explain how it manages its forests and how the two countries can coordinate better. but turning the smoke into a reason to threaten tariffs raises a very uncomfortable question. If smoke from California or Washington state blows into Canada tomorrow, should Ottawa add those damages to tariffs on American goods? If the answer is no, then why does that approach make sense when the wind blows the other way? What bothers me most is that only a few days earlier, a Canadian pilot had died while helping fight a wildfire in Colorado. The two events were not directly connected, but when you place them next to each other, the image is still hard to ignore. One side sends someone to help put out the fire and then hears about getting a bill for the smoke. Trust may sound abstract, but the consequences of losing it are very real. It becomes new contracts with other countries, new export ports, new flights, and customers who never come back. Washington may win one round of negotiations, but if Canada then spends years reducing its dependence on the United States, I am not sure we should call that a victory. I do not see anything worth celebrating when the two countries turn their backs on each other. The first people to pay the price will not be the ones sitting in conference rooms. They will be hotel owners, farmers, drivers, and workers on both sides of the border. The United States and Canada have not become enemies, but a longtime friend starting to keep their distance is already enough reason to worry. And maybe the real question is, are we forcing Canada to give in, or are we teaching them how to live with less need for America? To sum it up, this all started with Canada being blamed for wildfire smoke, followed by threats of even more tariffs. Then came the outrage when Canadians boycotted American alcohol, even though Washington was the one that started this round of trade confrontation. Canada is no longer responding with words alone. Canadians are changing where they travel, what they buy, and how they use their advantages in electricity, oil, potash, and minerals. A relationship that once operated almost automatically is slowly turning into carefully calculated cooperation. In my opinion, Trump is handling relations with an ally in a way that is both incompetent and dangerous. MAGA calls that strength, but what kind of strength drives customers away, raises costs, and makes a longtime ally start preparing to live without you? America is hurting itself by attacking a friend that has stood beside it many times. And Canada has realized that it cannot just keep waiting for goodwill. If you also want to look at politics through the bills, ordinary people actually have to subscribe to the channel.